In the early 1980s, I had just gotten my private pilot's license, and I was so excited with the freedom and the adventure of aviation. I couldn't wait to take someone up for a ride. And so my first volunteer was my wife. And we were going to redefine volunteer. That's part of the duties of being married. So she went for a ride for me, and it was one of those typical days that you find in the Central Valley. It was a sunny day, but it was very hazy. You couldn't see very far at all. It was not a nice day to be flying. And we went up and we flew around, and as we were heading back to the airport, it occurred to me that she hadn't said a word the entire flight. And so I said, Laura, you know, isn't this great? This is awesome, man. We think of the things we can do. And I'll never forget her response. She said this to me. She said, Dave, I know you, and I can't believe you know what you're doing. Now, you might think that's not a very supportive thing for a wife to say, but you would be wrong, because remember, she said that sitting in the cockpit next to me several thousand feet in the air. And the reason I tell you that story today is because probably some of you sitting here today are thinking the exact same thing she thought. Dave, I know you, and I can't believe you know what you're doing standing up there. Well, I'm not going to try and prove you right or wrong on that. I'll let you decide. But what I would like to do this morning is take a look at this text and show you why I want to be standing here today. And I think God has something to say to each one of us from this text this morning. A woman was visiting London for the very first time. She was so excited to see the city that she is in her hotel room, several stories high, and she's leaning out of the window looking at the city and just trying to take it all in. And she's so excited to be there. But in her enthusiasm, she loses her balance and tumbles out the window, right into the back of a garbage truck that happened to be driving by. Now she's flailing around in the garbage trying to get out unsuccessfully. She's trying to get the driver's attention, again unsuccessfully. And a British gentleman happens to be standing nearby. And in typical British humor, he says this, "That's just another example of American wastefulness." Said that woman looked like she was good for another 10 years at least. Well, at 54 years old, I hope I've got at least another 10 years, if not 20 or 30. But at some point in all of our lives, we start analyzing our life. And we start asking ourselves, am I living a life that's worth living? Am I living a life that's meaningful? Is my life significant? Or am I just wasting it? I can't imagine anything more tragic than to get to the end of my life and to look back on all of my years and say, I've wasted it. I've wasted my life. Now, I suspect that each of us at some point in our lives have contemplated the same thing. Is mine a life wasted? All we have to do to look around us, and we can realize that everyone has those kind of thoughts at some time in their life. People are desperately trying to look younger, be more successful, have more toys, and take better vacations, all trying to create worth in their own life. Howard Hughes, when he was alive, was one of the richest men in the world. Howard Hughes could buy whatever he wanted. He could do whatever his mind could imagine. If money, possession, good looks, and opportunity were the avenue for creating meaningful lives, certainly Howard Hughes had a meaningful life. But those things can't create meaning in our lives. Howard Hughes, the richest man in the world, died alone in a hotel room, terrified of the world he had created. If only I do this, if only I look this way, if only I accomplish this, you fill in the blank, my life will have meaning. Only it doesn't work that way. Fortunately for us, our lives can have significance, but we can't do it. We can't do it. And that's what our passage talks about this morning. At the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, we read something that is a foundational principle for living a significant life. In Genesis 1:27, we read this. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Now, theologians have written volumes about what it means to be created in the image of God. But one thing they all agree on is this, is that God created us to be in fellowship with him. We were never created to find value in and of ourselves. Our value comes from living in relationship with the God who created us. God created us to enjoy him. God created us to know him personally. And that's the key, that we know him personally. Because of the way we were created, there's nothing we can do to create significant meaning in and of ourselves. That comes from God. But we have to know him personally. Many of us view God as the object of a belief system. I belong to this church. This church believes in God. Therefore, that's how I relate to God, is through my church. That's like considering yourself to be married because one time you read a book on marriage and it sounded like a good thing. That's not marriage. That's not marriage. And I dare say that none of us would find significant meaning in that arrangement. Marriage, by definition, is a deep and intimate relationship between people. And the more intimate the relationship, the more meaningful the marriage. And that's why throughout the Bible, God uses this concept of marriage to describe the relationship he wants to have with his people. God's desire for you and I is that we live in a close, personal relationship with him. And when we know God on a personal level, we can begin to understand what it means to enjoy God. Last week, Lori and I were in a seminar in Grand Rapids, and one night after the seminar was over for the evening, we ran to Calvin College real quick before the sun went down. Now, Lori and I met at Calvin. We dated at Calvin. We got married between our junior and senior year at Calvin, and we lived there for 2 years after we were married. And as we were walking around the campus, looking at her dorm and mine, and just walking around the campus, all these memories just started flooding back to us. I can remember being so in love with this girl I had just met. And I can remember dating. And I can remember sitting in class just hoping that when the bell rang, we could run outside and I might see her walking to class. Or I might run into her in the coffee shop, or I might see her on her way back to the dorm, and maybe we'd even talk. And I just remember being so captivated by this girl that it filled me with joy that was unbelievable. Now, if loving a girl can do that to you, imagine the joy you can experience if the God of the universe loves you personally. That is a joy that is truly indescribable. The God who created the stars, the God who created the oceans, the mountains, the God who created the universe loves us deeply and personally. And he longs for that personal and intimate relationship. That, according to Genesis 1, is the foundation for a meaningful life. We can only find significance in life when we know God in a very personal way. But that personal relationship that God created us to enjoy was corrupted by our sinful nature. We have all sinned and we have not escaped its corruption. Sinful man cannot live in the presence of a holy God. Our sinfulness cannot exist in proximity to his glory. Romans 3:23 says this, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." The Greek here says that our sinfulness fails his glory. It lacks his glory. It falls short of his glory. And remember, only one sin does that. It's like being pregnant. Either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant. You can't be almost pregnant or a little bit pregnant. It's the same with sin. You either are sinful or you are not. So as a result of our sinfulness, we now miss out on the intimate relationship that God created us to enjoy. We miss out on the meaningfulness of life. Fortunately, God didn't leave us in that sinful state. The entire Old Testament of the Bible is the story of God trying to restore that relationship with us. God trying to pull us back into that intimate relationship he created for us to enjoy. And of course, Jesus Christ came as the culmination of that plan. He died on the cross to assume our punishment so that we could again enjoy God in a very personal way. Every time we look at that cross, it should be a reminder to us that the God of the universe wants to have an intimate and meaningful relationship with each and every one of us. God desires that. He wants that. So much so that he sent his son to die to make it happen. 2 Corinthians 5:21 is one of the greatest passages in all of Scripture. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. In the movie National Treasure, the hero of the story, Nicholas Gates, uncovers a plot to steal the Declaration of Independence. And Gates figures the only way to prevent this from happening is to steal the Declaration himself and hide it from the people trying to take it, which is what he does. And at the end of the story, good triumphs over evil, and he returns the Declaration of Independence back to the FBI, who have been chasing him the whole movie. And in one of the last sequences of the movie, they have this conversation. The FBI asked him, "Gates, what would you like as a reward for saving the Declaration of Independence?" And Gates says, "You know, I really don't want to go to jail." He says, you have no idea how much I don't want to go to jail." And the FBI says, "Gates, somebody has to go to jail. The Declaration of Independence was stolen. Somebody has to pay for that crime." And that's the way it is with sin. Sin is sin, and somebody has to pay for it. And so Jesus volunteered to pay for our sin. He sacrificed himself on the cross so that we could enjoy this intimate relationship with God. He took on our sin and then he gave us his righteousness. What a trade. What a trade. He took on our sin and gave us his righteousness so that we could enjoy God once again. You can spend your entire life trying to get your arms around the reality of that. Our lives can now be spent enjoying the God who created us because of what Jesus did. Our lives now have meaning because of what he did. And Paul says that it even gets better than that, because when we die, we get to spend eternity in the magnificence and the glory of Almighty God. Now, some people say, well, that sounds kind of boring to me. But remember, this is the God who created the universe. This is the God who created the oceans and the mountains. And to think that we can live with him for all eternity, discovering more who he is. Paul understands that. And that's why